So today we're going to talk about specific tactics to build culture. Now, we all know in HR just how important culture is. However, it's also vague. I'm hoping to take some of the ambiguity out of it today with specific approaches to culture. That's all coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and we're going to talk about HR stuff here. Please subscribe to the show or podcast to keep learning from my guests. So today my guest is Tiffany Castagno. Tiffany is an HR consultant out of Madison, Wisconsin. She's the CEO of CEPHR Consulting. It's Madison, right?
It is now.
Okay, yeah, right. I was thinking, cheapers, you just moved. Anyways, Tiffany is also a speaker and an author, and she's got a lot to share, and you'll soon see why. And culture is one of her things. A shout out here to Angela Nguyen of the Leadership Within podcast for the introduction. Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
I'm doing well, Andrea. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to talk about culture. And as I said in the intro, it is a kind of nebulous idea, because it's just different elements of culture. Do you have a safety culture? Do you have a feedback culture? Do you have a psychologically safe culture? There's so many different nuances to it. So how do you define or assess culture when you're going into an organization?
Yeah, so I always love this question because I always start out with saying people think it's fluffy and it's just very intangible, and some of it can be, right? Because what I define it as is the culture, the fiber, the fabric, this is who we are, but who we are in what we say and what we live out in practice. And so it's everything that is anything about a company. And I always describe it too as that feeling of, hey, we went out to dinner with friends, and are they in love or are they fighting? That you can literally feel it when you walk into a building. Trust me, you can. So those of you who are trying to hide it, but it's really, what it comes down to, and one of my partners talks about this a lot, is it becomes the behavior. So we can stick all the mission, vision, values up. So it's that, right? And how we live that out. But it's also how are we behaving behind that? And what does it look like to live out the culture, bring about the brand that we say we have? And how do we treat our people? And are we people first? That's kind of how I describe it. And it's a little bit different every time.
When you're going into an organization, how do you assess it?
Yeah. So we look at, kind of more an audit, what's happening around the entire organization. So you mentioned, feedback loops. What are those different things? How do we communicate with each other? That's a big one, because as much as we think that we're communicating, we're not. So often as I start to work with clients, I'll discover, we got a communication gap over here. Sounds like either leadership or the employees are not on the same page. And looking across to see what are the policies, programs, initiatives, beliefs, and values that are in place. So starting there, I call it current state to end state. Where are you now and where are you looking to go? And what are the gaps we need to assess in between? So some people call this a gap analysis. Some people call it a needs assessment or an audit, culture assessment. Whatever you call it, it's looking at end to end. Who are you? Are you doing the things you say you do? And are there pieces missing? What elements may be missing in order to make it a people first culture where people are engaged and also where they stay?
This is a sidebar question. Does everyone actually want a people first culture? I don't think they actually do.
I've never been asked that before. I agree with you. I don't think that everyone does. I think some people are profit over people, right? We've seen that. But I'm lucky to work with people, and I only work with people who do care about people first. Now, maybe they're not going to get it exactly right, but they're on their way and they desire to make it that way.
All right. So what isn't culture, or stated differently, how do people get confused about what culture is?
I feel like I always want to get away from this. Like, it's not the beer and ping pong and pizza and happy hours, but it's not. I feel like that's the classic cliche that we go to, but it is because that's how people sometimes get it wrong. And I'm not saying this out of judgment or to shame people. I'm saying it in hopes to educate people that those things are great. Team building events, if you want to go bowling, that's amazing. But what it's not, what we confuse sometimes is that it's like, well, we have this open office environment. Well, what if I have other needs? What if I have, a disability, or what if just for some reason that's not how I work best? Some folks think, what's great for one person is great for everyone. And so it's not applying a blanket across everything. That does not invite DEIB. That does not put the individual first. It's not performative, or it is performative if we're going to say, hey, here's some snacks and we'll give you free coffee. And those things can be amazing, but they're not the be all end all. People want satisfaction and purpose in their work. They want to understand that they're heard, seen, valued, and appreciated. That's where sometimes the lines get blurry, right?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great point. And I would have to say that when you look at the Gallup 12, the factors of employee engagement, a pool table, snacks, yoga, it's not in there anywhere.
It's not, but do you have a best friend at work is?
Yes, it is. It is. For sure. And that's important. And maybe that's what we need to be facilitating. And maybe that's what's intended in some ways by the pool table and the yoga class. Food for thought. So as I also said in the intro, I think culture has dimensions. What are the important dimensions of culture?
Yeah, so we talked about a couple, and I think, hugely, and this is why we have mission, vision, values. But I think what we've gotten away from when we look at what culture isn't is, we're like, great, that's established, done, check, move to the next thing. So we have to understand that culture does have dimensions. And I'm so proud and excited that you think of it that way, because I think that people think it just is this one thing and it's static, and we establish it and we set it down. You're going to have a culture regardless of whether you work on it intentionally or not. And I love that you talked about intention, because our intent doesn't always measure impact. But really, when we look at it, it is what is underneath the actual mission, vision, values we establish? How are we practicing those out? Do we have good communication? Communication is a huge pillar of that. What are the norms and behaviors? I was working with a client recently, and they said, we're redoing our values because we had them and they were great and we were living them out, but nobody could tell us what they were. It was too clogged up. There were too many of them. CEPHR has a value of community, for instance. What does that look like? That's a broad term. To you, it may look like going on LinkedIn and, having a community group, or on Facebook and having a community group. It might look to me like volunteering, serving on boards. It could look so many different ways, but really we have to understand what it looks like to that company in practice, and do my values align with that? So it's even, what are the, recruitment and onboarding practices that you have? What's your leadership style? How do we operate in concert? And, do we have a psychologically safe environment for folks to feel like they're safe?
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the importance of values?
Look, so I just literally got oh, I'm so excited. I'm like little dancing fairies. I can't wait to share this with one of my partners. We got on the D too, because as I was thinking about our conversation today, and I've been so excited for it, it reminded me of a project that we worked on where we connected the values to the culture. And so another dimension I think that's important is our customers, right? Like, who do we serve, and are we in a service mindset? And to me, that community, that there as well. So when we say we have these values, do they match what the person coming in is? So we look at things like, what do you have the right interview questions and the right process to bring the right people in? Do you have, those are things we can assess for and get into the root cause. And so I think connecting it to that, if you don't have the right values as a company, you're not going to attract people the right people who want to work there. So their values have to match what you're looking for. So you have to have this alignment of the two, because values play so much into culture. And if anything's off, you're going to feel it and the culture will shift like a crack in the ground. Sometimes it happens fast. Sometimes it happens slowly.
You know, a lot of times an organization, and they post it everywhere, they got their mission, vision, values. How do you understand if the values are being executed in the organization or if they're actually living by a different set of values?
That will almost always come out in an engagement survey. And so while it's not the only tool, I think, you know, when we talked about before, Andrea, like what culture isn't, I think sometimes we rush to too many surveys and people get survey fatigue and sometimes we don't do well and there's not action planning behind it. So definitely action plan. I think that becomes a piece of it too, where people need to understand, you know, you have to build up the voice of the employee. They have to have space to do that. But that's one way to do that in a tangible way is to do it through a survey. And it doesn't have to be a survey. It can be informal. We don't have to formalize everything. I see people kind of step into that trap a bit. Just have a normal conversation like what we're doing here. Use your one-on-ones. Don't push off one-on-ones. That's a great way too. To really be able to establish that. There's so many great tools. I think understanding that culture is living, as I say, we often refer to living documents in business. And culture is that way too, right? Yeah. That's why I said what I said before. It is dynamic. It is always going to be shifting. So you have to be agile and be on your feet. You have to be willing to change up your employee handbook. I know we don't like to do things like that. And if it's very tactical and compliance ridden, it is not. I promise you, employees are wanting more feedback these days too. So making sure you have a good performance culture, and that goes along with communication and feedback too. It goes along with what did I promise you when you came through these doors? Does that align with what you expected? When did I give you role clarity? That's a huge thing we work on here. Do you understand your role? And do I understand as a leader what you're supposed to be doing? Because that often becomes a disconnect. And that can be, I hear from employees, a huge way that culture gets eroded and people start to become disengaged and then they leave.
Hey, business owners, executive directors, are people stresses or challenges getting in your way? Imagine managing your people issues smoothly, addressing, better yet, dealing with employee problems before they're ever a big problem, adapting to all the changes in employee rules, and doing all of this easily. I can deal with your HR challenges so they're resolved. With me, you'll get the right things done, build a strong team, and create a workplace where the right people want to be. Your business deserves to thrive without a lot of HR hassle. I'm here to help you make that happen. With my assistance, you can focus on business growth, supported by a strong team. Take a first step towards a better business today. Reach out and let's chat. Visit the hrhub.ca and let's begin transforming your people challenges.
What's the role of leaders? Talk to me.
Well, of course, we know that they are establishing the vision, right? They should be living up to the mission, vision, values. Within that is like walk the talk. You have to be role modeling that and upholding it, because often what we see is that it's do as I say, not as I do, right? And no one likes that. People don't like to be micromanaged. And when they see that values gap, then it's like they're going to point right to leadership. And often people, as we say, they will leave their leader. It's not always the company, it's leadership that they're leaving. And so we have to be able to, as leaders, uphold those values. I would say also recognizing when people are doing something great, but giving the feedback where it's needed if something's not going great, and doing that in a timely manner. That is really, really helpful and supportive. And we talked about role clarity, so certainly setting expectations and the right expectations. But as we know, and I'm always going to pull in DEIB, women often are set to higher standards and higher expectations. So when we talk about consistency and making sure there's equity in the workplace, it's making sure the expectations align and that people are clear on those, but certainly upholding it as leaders. Those are biggies. And I often see that leaders feel like the reality is they are to a different standard, but it shouldn't be in a negative way. It should be that I am the model for this, and I'm doing that in a healthy way that supports you and your learning and your growth and you feeling safe here and heard and seen.
All right. You talked about recognition in there, and I think that's a super tangible tool to reinforce the culture you want. Of course, to provide recognition in the right way, that you have to be paying a lot of attention to what you're seeing and to reward those behaviors. But I think that would be a hugely valuable tool. Cannot tell you the number of times that recognition has come up across the series as a critical tool for managing a whole bunch of things, getting the behaviors you want. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. All right. Mistakes. Have we talked about mistakes? But what mistakes are you seeing organizations make around culture?
I think we talked about some of it, but I think to reinforce it, it's hearing people. And so I love that you and I both value active listening. And it's why I always talk about the fact that I'm in perimenopause too. But so that's part of why things will blip out of my head. But when you intentionally and actively listen, you are listening so deeply that you are in that moment. You are present with people. Also, when we talk about culture internally at CEPHR, the team knows, my partners know, I am intent. I am in it with you. If I'm on this podcast, I'm not looking out the window and it's a beautiful day with blue skies. It is intentionality and presence. And so that when people see that, or they sense that, perceive that their leader is absent, whether that's in physical or some other way, that can also erode culture. And so I would say that's a mistake. And when I talked about like not pushing off one-on-ones, they're the easiest things sometimes to move off the calendar, but that sends a signal to your employees that they're not important, that what they have to say is not important, what they're working on isn't important. And when we look at input from employees, and how they are valued and contribute to the organization, we can't ignore that. So that means that when we do those surveys, we have to put action behind it. And we have to tell people that we're doing that. Otherwise, they think, well, why am I going to give you my feedback and input? You're not going to do anything with it, right? And consistency. So we talked about consistency, right? That's important. And we have to have the right programs and processes. That's a huge one. People, Band-Aid things, and that could be okay for a little bit, but we have to spend the time to make the culture what we want it, or you're not going to get the results that you expect.
We're going to measure culture. What are some metrics we might use? What would maybe in the engagement survey, what would you be looking at?
Mm-hmm. So we talked about one thing that I wanted to talk about with measurements, but I already kind of covered it, was just the customer, right? When we look at, we've built this great employer brand. Well, none of us have a business without our customer. So how does that look, and how are you taking care of those folks? So the healthcare client that I described, they understood that, and we deeply went through like focus groups, trainings, interviews, strategic meetings, helping them articulate their values and their vision. Get back to those basics to make sure that you're measuring the right things, because that's grind, right? Like that's the foundation. When we look at employee engagement, maybe you don't have to ask because I know some HR people or some folks don't like the Gallup question about, do you have a best friend at work? But what it's getting at is to exactly what you said earlier is, do I feel safe here? Do I have a person who I can go to as a mentor, a guide, a buddy, somebody that I can vent to if I'm having a bad day, or where I can feel safe? We want to understand, am I getting the right feedback and development? Those are questions that we can ask as well. And looking at, do I have opportunities to grow? Do I have the tools to do my job? Do I feel connected to the vision and values? And really, when you look at employee engagement surveys, there's a lot of great stuff out there to benchmark against. But make it your own. And I celebrate folks who are making these engagement surveys their own. And, you can even use things like best places to work. They usually become an anchor for a lot of people I've seen, even my clients, to really look at, what things should we be measuring, as well as people's performance and how productive they are, and not in the icky sense, but like, am I giving you the right things and setting you up for success so you can work successfully and get the outcomes that we all need?
Yeah, I get what you're saying about, do what works for you. But I also get that, also draw upon the evidence-based research that's out there. Don't totally make it up. because there is a lot of research that goes into the Gallup, whether you totally subscribe to that or not. There's a lot of research that goes into that and some of the others. And that, so if you're going to do one, anchor yourself in some of those techniques. All right. Final question. It's kind of a two. Where can someone learn more? Please, promote yourself in this, but, also what are your go-to resources or ways of understanding culture?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I definitely, for me, especially as a certified HR professional, we have our professional development credits we have to receive every year to make us, on trend. Clients expect best practices. And one of the ways you can find me, but that I also learned is through LinkedIn. I'm very active there on both the company page and my personal page, so you can find me there. But I think, looking at what other people in your field are doing. So I'm often looking at culture. I just met with some women who do the same people in culture work that I do, and it's getting excited and building community around that too, so that there is a space to learn and grow, because I don't think that my perspectives and my way are the only way. So getting other ideas and pulling those in is really healthy for an organization. I really love Timothy R. Clark's The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety as a resource. I will pull it into almost everything I do, because it's easy enough that it makes it tangible and actionable. And he's just an amazing human also. Just to be able to connect what people are looking for. If you're looking for a tool as a leader, that's a great start. There's a book called The Power of Moment that I love as well, that talks about the employee experience. And I love that for leaders too. And I recommend it because really, it's great for all teams, but to really understand this is how much you could light someone up and expect, help them with expectations, and meet them where they're expecting this employee experience to be. That was a resource gifted to me by one of my leaders when I worked in corporate, and just, wow, it's just powerful. So I love that. And there's just, tools like Gallup. There's a tool called Priority Bridge that looks at culture assessment, and including the DEIB piece as well. Great tool, great humans behind that too, that I've had the opportunity to have coffee and just rich culture conversation with. So, there's so many more, right? But definitely, if I can help support where you want to look at a place to start, please reach out. Our website is live as well, always, at CEPHRconsulting.com. And I love just having conversations. I have an hour complimentary introductory call. So low lift there, no obligation. To reach out to have a conversation.
Well, thanks, Tiffany. That was amazing. I love the way you bring it all together, and your grasp of all the different elements and tendrils of it. The part I'm thinking about is that, at the beginning I was talking about the dimensions of a culture. Well, I'm going to think about this. Do the dimensions of the culture and the important dimensions live in the values? And that you would, so if safety is an important value, that you would bring it back to the values of the organization, and then it exists in your culture. I don't know. I'm going to think about that. Some of what Tiffany talked about relates to trust, or at least I definitely see some parallels there. I've done some amazing episodes on trust, and I encourage you to watch one of those. I'll put a couple links here. Thanks for watching out there, and we will see you next time.